In 1981, a brutal murder shocked a small Connecticut town, but the defense that followed was unlike anything seen in a courtroom before, at least in the United States. A man claimed he was not responsible for the killing because he was possessed, and the devil made him do it. Today, we discuss the chilling trial of Arne Cheyenne Johnson. This is Red Web. Welcome back, Task Force, to another episode of Red Web, the podcast all about unsolved mysteries, true crime, and, of course, the supernatural. I'm your resident mystery enthusiast, Trevor Collins, and joining me hearing this case, potentially for the first time, Alfredo Diaz.
Hello. This is unfortunate because I feel like this is a case of mental illness, in a sense.
Very possible.
That's kind of like my initial gut check feeling here.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious to see what evidence the defense has in terms of this whole possession kind of situation that they're bringing to the judge and to the court.
Oh, yeah.
How do you prove that?
How do you prove that? Maybe a couple blood samples, and then you look under the slot and you're like, among the red blood cells, you see a couple of ghouls.
Oh,
you never know.
Ghouls in the blood cells.
Little blood ghouls. We don't know how these demons work.
That's true. I don't know. I have no idea.
I'm not a scientist.
Yeah. We are not scientists. And honestly, there are a handful of you that are in the task force. Most of you aren't, so neither can you.
Buff, rippling minds, and I don't know if you guys can figure it out either.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? The demons work in mysterious ways. Now, the reason why I say you might have been aware of this case, usually you're reacting to these cases as I unfold them, but of course, we are back in the midst of the Conjuring universe. The Warrens are part of this story, and so I'm sure you've seen The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. You might have seen the Netflix documentary about this case.
Yeah, isn't that the latest move, the last movie that they released?
2021.
Yeah.
I don't know what their filmography, I mean, they've got a whole portfolio now. I don't know what their latest one was. They got one coming out this year.
They do have one coming out this year.
The Conjuring Last Rites.
I think The Devil Made Me Do It was the last one to come out as of this recording. But yeah, no, it's interesting. That makes sense now. I was like, that sounds so familiar. That's right.
Yeah.
Like literally the title of the movie.
Yeah, this is a very interesting case. We'll talk a little bit about their defense. As I teased, it is the first time that this was used in the United States, which is what brings a lot of attention to this particular case. But they do reference a case over in England. We'll talk about that one as well. We'll talk about how the judge approached it. We'll talk about the history of this family and everything around it. And I think, I have a takeaway at the end, my own personal theory that ties a lot of it together. But of course, we'll go through the history of this possession. We'll move into the crime. We'll talk about the trial. And then the theories are kind of between two things. Is this a true case of possession? Are these false claims of possession? What might be going on here? Lots to dissect. But before we dive in, lots to talk about in the Red Web universe. Of course, we're here in the midst of February. That means it is the season of love. So we are showering you guys at redwebpod.com, our Patreon, with a bunch of extra content. As always, we've got the movie clubs queued up, Fredo. That's the show that you host, that bonus exclusive podcast over there.
Yes, we do. We talk about movies. We just talked about a movie. The time to movie, TTM, is so fast on this podcast. We have a split extra thing where we talk about movies. We watch the movie, we break it down, we give our opinions, and we do all kinds of movies, from classics like The Exorcist to some movies that we're just diehard fans of, like Saw, or ones that are relevant. We did Final Destination somewhat recently, and the trailer Final Destination Bloodlines just dropped. But we, if you want to talk about the movie, you want the breakdown of the movie, that's your place to do it.
If we're getting into the bloodlines, maybe we'll figure out if there are ghouls in the blood.
It's true. It's a lot of blood right now. A lot of talk about the blood.
Yeah. And we do have an exponentially decreasing TTM. It's almost instant at this point. Maybe the first word I say should just be a movie title of some kind.
Right.
But also coming out this month, actually 2 days after the release of this podcast, we have a fun bonus video exclusively for you guys over on our Patreon page as well. It's kind of like a dating game for cryptids. So it's a lot of fun where we just explore cryptid lore while also kind of having one of us guess who the other cryptids are through fun and funny questions. But then I want to set up March Madness right around the corner. Now, we're not a sports podcast, so we're going to do a little tweak on it. It's either going to be like a monster madness or a mystery madness, and that's happening over at redwebpod.com. This will be accessible to everyone for free, so you can all engage with your favorite mysteries, vote on them, fight it out in the comments. What mysteries, what monsters do you think were the best? We're going to give like a handful, like a bunch of mysteries and topics we've covered before, and you guys will kind of do a whole bracket. And then to support the people who support us back, we're going to do exclusive video recaps, kind of going over those results week by week, covering some of our favorite comments of you guys kind of talking about the themes, talking about the mystery topics and things like that. So yeah, that's what's happening in March. And while we're talking about them, task force members, lots to shout out. We have Austin, who was a very recent gifted membership. That's right. You can gift a membership to any of your friends and loved ones in your life. redwebpod.com/gift. I believe it's on the Patreon page. You can see it there. Elite member Me Tapio, buff scientist Russ, and of course our illustrious squonks every month, Azrael, Gavin Day, Zachary Orr, Heather Stallcup, and then a special shout out to J Dillon 628 for suggesting this topic. So with that, J Dillon, we're going to dive in. 20-year-old Arne Cheyenne Johnson and his 26-year-old fiancée, Debbie Glatzel, lived in a small town known as Brookfield, Connecticut. So Brookfield is about 55 miles or 88 kilometers northeast of New York City, just to give you a little spot on the map from a known destination. And it is just outside the somewhat larger town of Danbury. They both were living together at Debbie's family home, though they had begun looking to move out on their own, getting their own place. In 1980, Debbie and Johnson had actually found a house to rent in Newtown, Connecticut, just another town outside of Danbury. On July 3rd, 1980, the Glatzels were actually helping the couple move into their new place. And this seems to be the turning point where all of this story started to kick off. While there at the new house, David, the younger brother to Debbie, who was about 11 years old, said that he felt strange, and when alone in one of the bedrooms, he claimed he was pushed down by a devilish figure with completely black eyes. This demonic entity told David, quote, "Beware." He then ran out of the house and later told his family that whatever this figure was, it, quote, "wanted his soul." End quote. Following this incident, David would often wake up screaming and crying at night, and it seemed as if his nightmares were only getting worse. So this inciting moment in Debbie and Cheyenne's new house became, again, a turning point for David, where now it seemed a possession began in some way, somehow, and was taking hold, getting worse and worse by the day.
I will say, as of right now, it seems like it's a stable person. And that, like, they're, like, truly experiencing something, you know? Because usually it's like, okay, well, you know, maybe they showed some symptoms or there's a history or whatever. This seems like, hey, it's just a normal couple. And then he's even, like, I don't know. I don't think it's, like, as of right now, that he's mentally, like, setting down the foundation for this grand lie, you know?
Sure. I mean, the only thing we really know at this point, and I think you're right, there isn't some history here of acting out. You know, we do have an 11-year-old boy. His older sister, who's 26, is moving out with her fiance. And so there's a change in the life, and I'm kind of forecasting one of my theories here. But that's really all we're dealing with. I think you're right, that it doesn't seem so far that there's any sort of acting out happening, right?
Yeah.
Now, according to their interviews in the Netflix documentary called Devil on Trial, the family claimed that one night after David woke up screaming, "He's coming for me," the entire house began to shake. And David actually said when talking about this shaking house, it was as if someone drove a truck into the side of the house. He actually said, quote, "like someone had drove a truck into it," end quote. And his brother Alan, just another brother of Debbie's, described it as, interestingly, as if a large UFO had landed on the house. They then claimed that the lights began to flash and objects were breaking in this rustling, almost as if the walls were shaking so much that things were falling over and breaking. It's very dramatic vision here.
We are also getting multiple people like experiencing something together.
Right. Absolutely.
So already this is like, this case is throwing me for a loop. I mean, I saw the movie and I don't know how like true that was to the case, but I saw it and I don't remember it at all. It was not a good movie.
Oh
But already I'm just like, I'm thrown for a loop just because I don't know. There's so many different pieces of detail that make it seem like it's more legit than not, interestingly enough.
Yeah, the corroboration amongst the family is very interesting because when you've covered as many cases as we have, this is episode 222, by the way, to age us. It feels like yesterday was episode 200. But when you cover as many cases as we have, you start to notice patterns, and one of those patterns for especially possession and demonic-centered topics is that nobody else really sees what they see. The person is in isolation, and it makes them feel a little stir-crazy, like no one's believing them. So I agree. The fact that the family is also reporting things either says one of two things. The cynic in me says that they're validating this large phenomenon and exacerbating it, or on the other hand, something, whatever it is, something is happening. And David seems to be the center of it. So David said he, in his nightmares, dreamt of a scary man with black eyes. Again, very similar to what he saw in Debbie and Cheyenne's new house to be, right? The place that they were going to rent.
Yep.
This scary man with big black eyes, animal features, pointed teeth and ears, and it had hooves instead of feet. And so now we start to get very close to the biblical description of a demon or the devil. And because of this, the Glatzels turned to their Catholic church in order to seek some help. This seemed beyond, the corporeal, right? Beyond the help of the police. The house is shaking. Our son is screaming and crying at night. He's seeing things. He's been pushed down. Let's turn to the church.
Right. I mean, like, where else can you turn? I feel like even if you're not big into religion, it's like, well, I guess you go to the church, because who else is going to be even remotely qualified in a way?
I don't know. If I'm seeing something that's shaking my doubt in science, I might start burning sage. And I don't know if you drink holy water or not, but I might imbibe it,
You know what? I'll do it. Why not? Can't hurt.
It might put some little angels in my blood next to the ghouls and help, there'd be a little battle.
So that might be like the white blood cells that cancel it out.
Yeah. Now, I'd be very curious as we move into this possession phase and eventually into the crime phase, how this lines up with the movie. Because, of course, we're covering the case as we know it, collated from a lot of different sources, including the documentary. But the movie, of course, is going to take some liberties.
Right.
And I'm curious where this maybe differs. Now, at this point, reportedly, someone from the church blessed their home, but David continued to see strange figures even when awake. And it would often be this same demonic figure, but interestingly, sometimes it would appear to him as something else. And I want to quote him, quote, "An old man with a white beard dressed in a flannel shirt and jeans," end quote. So you got Pop and you got a demon.
Yeah.
One feels like a traditional ghost that maybe inhabited the house before you, and one feels not that way at all.
Well, look, I mean, who's to say that the ghost has to dress up every time? You know what I'm saying?
My God.
I'm just saying, you don't dress up every time you go out,
He's got formal wear.
Sometimes maybe you just want to be casual. And in all honesty, it could just be a casual thing. The ghost is just like, look, man.
Oh my God. We got a casual ghost.
We don't know the rules and regulations. I'm sure ghosts might be able to change their forms or something. And it's just like, I don't know. Oops, I forgot to put my clothes on or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, whoops. Forgot we were meeting today. These are my comfy jeans.
I mean, who's to say the afterlife is so strict, right?
Oh, I would hate that.
That would suck.
If the afterlife is black tie, listen, we're all going to look fly, but we have to admit it's not super comfortable.
No, not at all. No.
But what I see here, taking the story at face value, is maybe the demon taking on a different form to bring David in, lower his defenses, or, I don't know, play mind games with him.
Oh, that's
right?
a good point.
So eventually these visions became so distressing that David began to miss school and even gained 60 pounds. And to add to the concern, there would be times where he would wake up with unexplained bruises and scratches. Again, just more physical evidence of something happening. And with no answers, and David's condition seemingly only getting worse, the Glatzels didn't know who to turn to. So of course, the infamous Warrens got involved. In fact, it was one of the neighbors who told the family about Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now, we've talked about these two in many different episodes. In fact, to the point where I feel like we should do a dedicated episode about the history, the stories, and honestly, some of the infamy, some of the criticisms and critiques about like the drama that surround the Warrens.
Yeah. I mean, because they monetized it. They monetized the hell out of it.
Yeah. You know, you can say get that bag, but you can also see, and you'll see it kind of in this case in particular, how they only seem to perhaps exacerbate it. So for everybody that they seem to be out there helping, they might also be hurting situations or exacerbating them, right? So without, we'll do a full breakdown, and we've talked about them before, but kind of crash course here. Ed and Lorraine Warren were self-proclaimed demonologists, with Lauren being a self-claimed clairvoyant. With their powers combined, they investigated paranormal encounters all kind of out of their home base, filled with possessed trinkets, and it was honestly, this is kind of mind-boggling, and maybe this is how the neighbor knew about it. Their house was just a short drive away in Monroe, Connecticut, about 14 miles or 22 kilometers from Brookfield. So they really weren't that far away.
Oh, that's got to be how.
Yeah.
I mean, a famous couple like that, they got a house down there, and they keep all their weird, freaky stuff that you shouldn't be touching or looking at in their home, which is wild.
Yeah.
It's always wild to me that. I mean, did we say they got it blessed like every week or something like that?
That's what they did. They blessed it like frequently. And now I believe, since both Ed and Lorraine have since passed, it is under the ownership and supervision, I should say, maybe, of the son-in-law. And it has since moved, to my most recent understanding. My fiance at some point went out there as part of the Annabelle movies. And so there was a press thing happening. And so she and a friend of ours, Blaine Gibson, they went there and actually got to see the Annabelle doll and got to see a lot of these trinkets and things at their museum. But since then, that was a few years ago, I guess it's moved. And I don't know how you move a house filled with possessed objects.
Exactly.
But I assume very carefully.
Yeah.
So the Warrens, they also founded the New England Society for Psychic Research. Honestly, a pretty cool acronym, NESPR, N-E-S-P-R. Makes me think of James Bond and Vesper. I just love that name. Yeah. But of course, they are known for their involvement with many, many famous ghost stories, a few of which we've covered, right? Amityville, Annabelle, many, many others, as well as the movies based on this, right? The Conjuring universe. Now, according to that documentary, Devil on Trial, in their first meeting with the Warrens, they brought along a doctor to examine David before interviewing him, which I do have to appreciate, and his health did seem quite normal. Nothing stood out to the doctor as this could be an underlying causer, right? Mm-hmm. Per People magazine, Lorraine said of David, quote, "While Ed interviewed the boy, I saw a black, misty form next to him, which told me we were dealing with something of a negative nature. Soon the child was complaining that invisible hands were choking him, and there were red marks on him. He said that he had the feeling of being hit," end quote. Now, I don't know about you, but if I saw a large, ominous, misty, smoky black form floating in the room, I think that would give me a negative vibe for sure.
Yep.
It makes me think of like Insidious.
Yes.
When they're like looking at the parents and like you see that demon sitting around the... Oh,
yeah. Yep.
That made my skin crawl.
Yeah, that was real well done.
Now, the Warrens determined that David was possessed by a demonic entity, so they encouraged the family to document his behavior. The documentary on Netflix includes some of these recordings. Things like that he said, quote, "You will die," end quote. And he was caught on record actually saying other things. I don't want to quote it here, but insulting his mother, for example. Now, as time went on, David began to growl and hiss, violently sit up and down over and over, attack his family. At one point, he supposedly spoke in Latin, and I was curious. I wanted to dig into that. I wanted to see if there were recordings of it, if we could confirm that it was Latin and maybe not just kind of babble. But either way, he claimed throughout all of this time that he had a feeling of being choked, and it's unclear how many incidents like this occurred over time. During this time, though, he recited Bible verses and parts of the book Paradise Lost. So, if you don't know, Paradise Lost is an epic poem from the late 1600s, and it explores many different religious themes, but kind of truncating it all, it primarily focuses on the idea of good versus evil, the concept of free will within the confines of predeterminism, right? Like, fate is sealed, but you have free will within it, kind of.
Oh, interesting.
And the author kind of sought to justify God's ways to men, is really the idea behind that book. And so, suffice to say, a very religious foundation on that thing.
Yeah.
Now, here's what's interesting. The Warrens claimed that there were 43 demons possessing David at that time.
What?
Yeah, 43 demons. And they performed then 3 exorcisms on him. Now, I was very curious how they came up with 43, and it turns out that Ed Warren had told People magazine that David gave him 43 different names, and therefore it must be 43 different demons kind of talking to Ed. This reminded me very succinctly of the demon house of Gary, Indiana, where 2 psychics told a mother in her house that it was possessed with upwards of 200 demons. Otherwise, these are kind of cartoonishly large numbers that you don't normally see in a case like this.
God, I don't even know 200 people. That's crazy.
Yeah. And that was a very small home, too. We did a whole episode on that. But 200 demons in that small little Gary, Indiana house would be a little crowded.
Yeah, very.
Now, during one of these 3 exorcisms, you have a moment that is straight out of The Exorcist itself. Johnson, right, the fiance to Debbie, the soon-to-be brother-in-law to young David, apparently taunted the demons and encouraged them to enter him instead. You know, leave him alone, take me, come for me. And at least one source, the Gross Law Group, states that Johnson visited, as he called, quote, an abandoned well, where David supposedly first saw the scary man. There he then begged the demon to possess him instead. But the way we see it in a lot of our research is that David never went to some sort of abandoned well. This might be made up. It seems that David first had this encounter at the house that Debbie and Cheyenne were looking to move into. Yeah. So I wanted to cover this thing, this abandoned well idea. It's a very visual, very amazing story, but I'm not sure about the authenticity of that piece.
Yeah, it seems exaggerated.
Yeah. Now, eventually, in October of 1980, that same year, right, the Glatzels got psychiatric help for David and sent him to a private school, according to People magazine. By November, Johnson and Debbie decided to move into their new apartment, and she got a new job. While things appeared to be going better for the Glatzel family, the Warrens told police that they predicted tragedy would fall on the family. And as you know, it did. And were the Warrens investigated? Because I feel like if I said, tragedy's gonna befall that family, and then a murder happened, you know I'm detained.
Yeah.
You know they're asking questions.
Yeah, you locked up.
Yeah, like, what do you know? What did you do?
Good luck fighting those allegations.
Yeah. Now, before we move into the crime phase of this story, this case, Brookfield police officer John A. Anderson told New York Times in 1981, quote, that they were working with clergy in a house they claimed to be a demonic lair, and that there was some potential, they thought, for some violent act. So it's in the water, it's in the air. People are feeling the idea that some sort of violence might befall this area. A lot of demonic energy centering on this family. But after these exorcisms, David isn't fully done with what he's feeling, what he's seeing. These nightmares continue. But otherwise, it's relatively uneventful for 4 months. Again, David still has a few things happening on and off, and we don't know exactly when that wound down and disappeared, but 4 months later, on February 16th, 1981, Arne Cheyenne Johnson called in sick from his job of tree pruning, and Cheyenne then met up with his fiancée, as you know, Debbie, at her new job in the Brookfield boarding kennels. So Debbie on that day was accompanied by Johnson's sisters as well as her cousin, so it's kind of like this micro family reunion happening at her job, I guess. And Glatzel's manager, who was also the couple's landlord, Alan Bono, who was 40, suggested that they have lunch at a local bar. Since not much is going on, I guess, at work, Cheyenne kind of called off sick from work. They're all meeting up. Hey, let's go to the bar, get some lunch. And during lunch, all of the adults had been drinking, but Bono became especially inebriated and a little belligerent. They all then returned to the kennels, where Bono invited everyone back to his apartment, which was upstairs. And around 6 p.m. that day, Bono made an offensive comment about Glatzel, which then led Johnson to attack him in response. Like, hey, don't offend my fiance. It must have been some pent-up energy here. The drinking's involved, of course, and he attacks.
Liquid courage.
Or liquid stupidity, however you want to look at it.
Right. The courage to say something stupid.
Yeah. Now, before this all settles and turns into a murder, the Washington Post reported that Johnson's sister, Wanda, claimed that he actually began growling at Bono, which is kind of interesting. And then after a scuffle amongst the two, right, he kind of grabs him, they tussle a little bit, Johnson took out his pocket knife and then stabbed Bono 5 times in the abdomen.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Also, why you got a pocket knife?
I don't know, man. Sometimes people just walk around with knives on them. you know?
Like a Swiss Army knife, I get that, you know?
Yeah, or, you know, like I might have one of them switch combs, you know?
Yeah.
You never know when, like, you need to put a few hairs back in place.
Yeah, you do.
But, listen, when I was younger, it was a thing. Like late high school, early college, walk around, a little bit of self-protection, a little bit of just like young machismo, right? Where you've got, you know, you've got a little knife on you. I had a friend who was like super into collecting knives. So it was also kind of just created the friend group. He was like, hey, happy birthday. Here's one of my knives. And I don't know. That was a short-lived period, but I guess I can get it. You know, why, you know, you might have it for utilitarian reasons, especially if you're a tree pruner. You know, I don't know if you need to be cutting rope or anything, but yeah, I guess it's not too out of the normal. But
no.
When it's used as a weapon, quite abnormal.
Right.
So shortly after these 5 stabs to the abdomen on Bono, Johnson got up and ran into the nearby wooded area. It kind of disappeared for a little bit, and police eventually arrested Johnson 2 miles away from the apartment. And according to the documentary, Devil on Trial, an EMT actually recognized Johnson walking along the road and themselves called the police, and that's how the police found him. According to the Manchester Evening Herald, Johnson told police officers he had no memory of the incident and had not intended to hurt anyone. In the police cruiser, he actually said he, quote, had a drinking problem, end quote, and when he arrived at the station, he became incoherent before then falling asleep for roughly half an hour. Bono himself was declared deceased a few hours later in the hospital. So Johnson had no prior record before this particular crime, and honestly, this became the first recorded murder in the entire history of Brookfield, which is pretty wild. But now it's time to move into the trial, obviously. The one where they wanted to claim possession, and I think it's kind of fascinating how they went about it. In September of that year, Johnson's lawyer, Martin Minella, presented the defense he planned to use at Danbury Court. He argued that Johnson was under demonic possession at the time of the crime. If we go back to David's exorcisms, the lawyer and kind of the family a little bit claimed that Johnson had reportedly behaved differently after these exorcisms. This would also be around the time that he would speak directly to the demon and ask it to jump into him, leave David alone. We know that David is still experiencing some of this stuff at this time, but suffice to say, you know, Debbie claimed that at least on 4 different occasions, Johnson seemed to enter a sort of a trance, that he did seem to act differently after these exorcisms, and she claimed that at one point he actually punched a hole into a chest of drawers. And another time he fell about 100 feet, maybe doing his job, without any injury.
100 feet?
100 feet's pretty far to fall.
I mean, people have survived like jumping out of a airplane, you know what I mean? But yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot to,
right.
to ask for.
100 feet without injury, it's not impossible. It is interesting, right? And so they're kind of using these odds and ends to be like, clearly something supernatural is surrounding Johnson here. In fact, Debbie told People magazine, quote, Cheyenne would go into a trance. He would growl and he would say he saw the beast. Later, he would have no memory of it. It was just like David, end quote.
I'm surprised people didn't say that the Warrens like sabotage his mind or anything like that.
Ooh, we're gonna get there. I'll tell you that.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, when we start getting into the nitty gritty and the theories, there's definitely some pieces around the Warrens that I go, aha. See, that's what I'm looking for, because there's a lot of, you know, drama surrounding the Warrens, a lot of controversy surrounding them, and this is exactly why. This is one of those cases. I'm gonna play my hand a little bit, where I think their presence only exacerbated things, only made it worse.
I mean, in a sense, like, I'm sure either they want to help or monetize or whatnot, but like, it could help justify someone's thoughts, feelings, opinions on something that may not be there. You know, having someone that's like an authority on it, you know, it could justify like, you know, like, oh, I am possessed, as opposed to like, no, you just kind of need someone to talk to, need some help, you know?
Absolutely. You're in the right train of thought, and we'll dive into that. But the lawyer, Minella, used all of this history that we just talked about as evidence that Johnson was possessed, and thus not guilty of the crime, particularly because the demonic possession would mean that Johnson did not intend to commit the murder, and he intended to bring in what he called exorcism experts to the court. Minella pointed out that while demonic possession has never been used as defense in the United States, it has in the United Kingdom. This is a completely different case. Maybe we'll talk about it someday. But Michael Taylor was the first to use such a defense. And this was just a few years prior, during 1974, maybe, 7 years, give or take? And this was in England while he was on trial for murder. And in that case, they basically acquitted him on insanity. So he went into hospital for 2 years, then he went into a special ward for 2 years, and then he was out. And so I think that was the angle that Minnella was trying to go for, some sort of plead insanity type of thing. So this trial began on October 28th, 1981 in Danbury, Connecticut. However, the judge considered this, quote, incompetent defense, end quote, and refused to allow its use in court. It was even further noted that there could not have been any physical or scientific evidence to prove Johnson's possession. So when we go back and talk about your gut instinct at the top of the show, how are they going to argue this? How are they going to prove it? The judge flat out said, this is incompetence. I will not allow it in the court. There's nothing you could possibly bring to me that would show this happening. Not even a slide of red blood cells covered in gremlins. Okay?
Well, I mean, like the judges themselves, like they build reputations, you know?
Absolutely.
With the public, with colleagues. And so it's one of those things where they want to protect that reputation. And so
absolutely,
I mean, a case where it's like, okay, we're going to take this case seriously where this person was possessed, like that could be a huge hit to their profession.
100%. And you also have the thing called, and I'm no lawyer, I'm not an expert in any way, but you also have a thing called precedent, where if you allow this, you might create a precedent where future murders might consistently go through, well, I was possessed. And all that does is get in the way of fact-finding and justice. And so, you know, believer or not, I do think that there needs to be room for evidence. And if the judge is coming to the table and saying, there's no possible way that you have any physical or scientific evidence that you can convince me, we're not bringing it into the court. That is, what is kangaroo court or whatever.
Yeah, kangaroo court.
And so in response to that, though, Minnella kind of shifted the argument to say that Johnson was not guilty, instead this time for self-defense. On November 24th, Johnson was given the verdict of not guilty of murder, but instead guilty of what's called first-degree manslaughter. Basically, the difference being murder being intentional, planned, like you wanted to do it, it was premeditated in some way. Manslaughter being kind of something like in the heat of the moment, something took you over, and it's still a crime, you still killed somebody, but it's slightly different in the law's eyes. And so because of that, the judge decided to give him the highest sentencing possible for manslaughter, which it's not life for murder, but it was 10 to 20 years in prison.
Ooh.
Yeah. Debbie and Johnson were married in prison in 1985, and he was then released a year later in 1986 for good behavior. In total, if you did the math, he spent 5 years in prison, and he has not been involved with the law ever since, as far as we could find.
I'm surprised that, like, you know, I mean, I guess, like, he was defending her honor, but also, like, that's a big thing to be like, okay, you killed someone. I still love you. I'm gonna get married to you.
Yeah. I mean, hey, maybe that's true love. I don't know. Yeah. It transcends murder, but it's really hard to say. You know, we have the facts that we have. I don't know exactly what Bono said that night. Murder is never the option, but I don't know. It's weird when you hear about a murderer who kind of like gets out early on good behavior, or in the other case, a murderer who gets out because they pled possession. I don't know what that makes you feel like. I feel like it just gives you a bunch of colorful emotions about like, am I safe? Or am I overthinking this? Or, you know, can people be rehabilitated? Was this a like volatile moment that won't be rekindled, right? Like there's a lot to unpack in this. And I'm going to take the first angle. When we talk about these theories, I want to take the first angle of this being a true case of possession, talk about all the elements that go into that. And then there's a lot to talk about too of the false case of possession. And this is where I really want to unpack that conversation. There's a lot to think about and digest. So we'll table those thoughts for a second. But any thoughts before we dive into those two angles?
No. I mean, honestly, as wild as it is, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Pretty clean cut as far as the story. Not a lot of twists and turns. But let's talk about it then. True case of possession. Even at the time of Johnson's trial, David continued to have demonic episodes, though they were less frequently. So it's unclear when these stopped entirely. It's a little fuzzy depending on the source you look at, but eventually they did. And maybe this crime was an inciting moment to be like, I'm not possessed anymore.
Did it happen like publicly, like in the middle of like a court hearing or something at any point?
No, that's a good question. As far as I'm aware, these were mostly in private circumstances, still, you know, mostly at night, having nightmares, things like that. Yeah. I'm not sure if it was like, hey, the family's at the grocery store and something supernatural happens or an outburst happens. I didn't see a lot of that. Now, it's possible David truly was possessed by many demons, with only one or several of the 43 leaving his body to take over Johnson. Again, let's take it at face value. If there are 43 demons here and Johnson's saying, no, come to me, it is possible that David maintains some level of possession and Johnson then has his own. And, you know, when you think about it, it is frequently claimed in a lot of these stories. We talk about the paranormal studies, we talk about demonology.
Yep.
It's frequently claimed that a demon in a possession case weakens its host over time until it can start to exert more control. And with 4 months of, air quotes, nothing before Johnson's sudden violence, one could argue that maybe that's what was happening. You know, we hear his change of behavior. We hear suddenly that he's punching a hole in a drawer. He falls out of a tree and doesn't get hurt. Like, maybe, again, is this the possession taking hold? After being arrested, you know, if you want to believe him or not, Johnson claimed he had no memory of the murder, which would track with the possession. And again, there's a lot to unpack here. We're going to talk about the false claims of possession here in a second, but my instincts are flying off the handle with wrinkles in this logic. But before we dive into that other side of the equation, Debbie herself is confident that Cheyenne was different after David's exorcisms.
There it is.
But even with this kind of defense, there are some wrinkles, right? Her claims of his changes in behavior, at least publicly, right? We don't know within the family or whatever, but publicly facing, she says, oh yeah, his behavior changed. Those came out after the crime occurred. So is this hindsight? Or was this a case where there was no reason to point it out until she had to defend him?
Oh, yeah.
So like, is she changing history, or is it just, well, why would she tell the public that her fiance is behaving differently until it mattered? And according to People magazine, Johnson's coworkers didn't seemingly notice any personality changes, but you know, maybe coworkers wouldn't notice the changes that a fiance would.
Yeah, you're not going to bed together at night, you know.
You hope not, you know, if you're engaged.
Yeah, you know, some people do. It's unfortunate and it breaks up families, but you hope that.
Well, you can also never rule out just a friendly hangout and sleepover. Everyone pulls out the sleeping bags and
everyone just having a cool, fun sleepover. Nothing else going on.
But yeah, taking it at face value, some of these things tend to kind of work, and I do like to suspend disbelief before I then kind of take the other side, which is what we're about to do here, because I think there's a web to untangle here, a red web, as it were. So I want to break this down from a few different angles, right? We have a legal defense angle, we have the drinking, and we also have what stood out to me anyway, again, talking about 222 plus episodes, there is a religious background mixed with kind of big life changes for an 11-year-old.
True.
So let's talk about each of those angles. First off, Manella's defense of, quote, the devil made me do it, end quote, might have been a clever argument to get his client the best deal possible. As I indicated, Michael Taylor ended up getting 2 years in hospital and 2 years in a secure ward, which is obviously less than 10 to 20 years for manslaughter or potentially life for murder. So there is some motivation to see if he can be acquitted on the grounds of insanity, much like precedent across the pond. Maybe that's the angle there. As far as the drinking angle, it's unclear why exactly Johnson went so far as to murder Bono, but he may have also been more inebriated than he thought, or than the people around him might have thought. Not only did he confess to having a drinking problem while in the police cruiser, but the word around town, this is interesting and worth noting, it's the rumor mill, but word around town was that there may have been an affair between Debbie and Bono.
Ew.
So...
See, that's the sloppy thing, because most likely that's just gossip, you know?
Right. So regardless of fact or fiction, rumor or truth, the fact that there's drinking involved, there's a lot of poor decision-making happening in that. If he's already defensive, if he's already a little, I don't know, is this real, is this not? You create then a powder keg of a situation. And one small move, one disrespectful comment, and you might ignite that and just explode this volatile situation. And that could just be simply what happened, for better or worse, right? Like, that it was misunderstanding mixed with drinking, mixed with emotions, and the end. Now, this is where things get fascinating for me. I love when other people come to the table. So let's talk now about Debbie and David's other brother, Carl Glatzel. He was the eldest of Debbie's So Debbie was the oldest. These were all younger brothers. He's the oldest of the younger brothers.
Okay, got it. Yep.
He has stated that he does not believe his brother nor Johnson were ever possessed. In the Netflix documentary, he argues that the Warrens described what David would do if possessed, right? So the Warrens are literally right in front of David. They're there to help because of his nightmares, because of what he says he's seeing. And that's where that was at, right? That's where the Warrens entered the picture.
Yeah.
But then in front of him, they would say to the parents or the family, well, if he was possessed, you would see growling, you would see cussing, you would see this, that, and the other. And so Carl is saying, you're basically giving him instructions on how he should act out.
Yes, yeah.
If he's believing he's possessed, you're priming his behaviors further.
Yeah. It couldn't, it doesn't even have to be intentional either.
Right. And listen, I'm not too much of a cynic, but the fact that the Warrens told the family to document everything, knowing now that they have like a movie and book franchise and everything like that, and the fact that they kind of exacerbated the underlying issue by in front of David telling him what else a supposedly possessed person would do, they just added fuel to a small fire, right? There's a concern here, something to figure out, but man, did they dump gasoline on it.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah, it could have been purposeful. And, it could have been a more nefarious, like, tell him in front of him, so then that way it causes more of a thing, and then we're already involved in this, or like first on the scene, and
give it a little nudge. Just give it a little nudge.
I mean, it's a theory, but it's so gross.
Right. And this is coming from Carl, and so I do want to take it at face value. Right? I do believe that he would have no reason to lie about this because he cares more about his family than the Warrens. And if the Warrens came through and messed with my family like that, yeah, I'd be telling everyone. Again, it is just a theory, but it does kind of rob it of some validity. And he also pointed out that while his family did make a little money, the Warrens themselves, and this is with hindsight because it's a recent documentary, I believe, family made a little bit of money, but he's pointing out the fact that the Warrens now have a book deal here. They got the Conjuring universe. They got, so their motivations didn't seem aligned with helping David, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's money based.
Further, he claims that he found a note from his mother's diary describing the family as all having their, quote, medicine, end quote. Now this is a little wrench in the whole system. He discovered in this diary a note about the family taking their medicine. And he believes that his mother was giving the entire family something that's called diphenhydramine. You might have seen it as called Sominex. It's more commonly known as Benadryl. It's an allergy medicine that a side effect is drowsiness. I have had this before on long planes, but the idea was maybe the mom was doing this to make the family tired. For whatever reason, we don't know, but if that is in her diary and it's true, and his theory stands, he's kind of theorizing that maybe it's the long-term use of this drug that caused David's visions, maybe that caused these nightmares, that caused him to act out. And then that rolled into getting the Warrens, and then that rolled into this spiraling out of control.
Oh, yeah.
And so, possession or not, he's saying, okay, if my mom is actually giving people too much Benadryl for too long, you're not supposed to take it prolonged periods of time. He then says that Johnson himself was also a, quote, victim of this as well. And so maybe that he wasn't in his right mind because of this.
Yeah, can like prolonged Benadryl do that? That's wild.
I'll be honest, I don't know.
Yeah.
I haven't had Benadryl, but for like, let me give myself some drowsiness when I fly to London,
Yeah, we take it responsibly.
Right. Or, like my dad's got allergies to certain things. So it was always I'm breaking out in hives. Let me take some Benadryl to knock this out. But I always knew it made him tired, so he would go nap then too. But yeah, I'm curious, Christian, actually, if you don't mind, while we kind of wrap out some of these thoughts, if prolonged Benadryl use has any sort of side effects of this nature, if it can, I would imagine being tired all the time doesn't help the mind.
No, not at all.
So while he takes a look at that, kind of wrapping out that idea, maybe the truth isn't that a demon messed with Johnson's mind, but instead the mother-in-law's use of this so-called medicine did. And this medicine, again, it could refer to anything. It could even refer to religion, but we don't know exactly what that is. To The Guardian, the director of Devil on Trial, Christopher Holt, actually had this to say about David and his brother Alan. Quote, "I've been lied to on numerous occasions, and as an interviewer, you get a sense for people like that. And I was sitting with these guys for 9 hours, grueling days, and you can see if a story starts to change. It never did, with David and Alan." I believe that they believe this happened. And I think the ending of our film explains it all. I don't think it was devils or demons, but I do think something went on in that house. End quote.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting like this whole I mean, it's in a diary though. Was that, I mean, I guess they could analyze. I was about to say, was that a plant in the diary?
Yeah, man, is that admissible?
But they would analyze the writing and,
yeah. How do you even analyze that?
I don't know. I mean, forensics, right? You could just, because your writing is kind of like a fingerprint in a sense, because you write a certain way.
Yeah. Unless you I'm a murderer, and then you start writing with your left hand for the ransom notes, and it's just terrible.
I wonder, how well does that work? He wrote with his left hand. I can't tell.
Yeah, I don't know, but you're right. I mean, you could match the writing and see if it was authentically her or if it was done later. But again, even if it's true, even if it's real, what is the medicine? And to me, I'm very curious, what made Carl Glatzel theorize that it might have been Benadryl or diphenhydramine, right? Was that prominent in the house? Was that something they knew about? Could it have been something more sinister? Could it have been something less sinister? It's fascinating.
To answer your question on the long-term side effects of Benadryl, the only one that looks like there's been some serious research into is possible associations with causing dementia down the line. But some other possible long-term side effects include just general memory problems, anxiety, and then dependence and withdrawal symptoms if you were to stop taking it. But other than that, all other side effects, as severe as they can be, tend to be more temporary.
Okay. So again, not a doctor, and I know it's kind of habit forming. They say don't take it consistently for the sake of sleeping, but if she's self-prescribing this to the family and they kind of become slightly insomniac-ish, right? They have struggles sleeping, and so they need it. Obviously sleep deprivation does terrible things to the mind. You start seeing things or hearing things, your anxiety spikes, all things shift with the lack of sleep. But that was a corner that I did not expect, a little twist in the turns, so to speak. But in closing, I have my own theory, and this is a theory I didn't really see out there very much, if at all. But after covering so many cases like this, I can't help but connect a few dots. We have David, who's 11 years old with a pretty strong religious foundation, especially, right, if he can quote the Bible and Paradise Lost from memory, if that's part of his possession. Additionally, he's going through a pretty big and perhaps upsetting change. His big sister, the beacon of his life, the role model he's had all 11 years, and he has never known a house without her. And also, her fiance. They're about to move out. And so what's interesting to me is that the texts he's quoting from carry themes of God's mysterious ways, free will and fate, the talk of demons and their fight against God, just to name a few of them, right? Mm-hmm. And while that doesn't really solve the murder here, I think that this is kind of David going through it emotionally. He's seeking answers through scripture, and the family, plus the Warrens, perhaps only fed into this possession story, and therefore he himself fed into it. He's either lashing out, right? Because this started when they were house hunting, when his sister was looking to move out.
Yeah.
And perhaps, for whatever reason, he's a young boy. He's lashing out. Maybe it's a desperate attempt to avoid change. Perhaps this stress led to shared stress, which combined with rumors and drinking then culminated in murder one afternoon. But suffice to say, my theory is that there's a very explainable, understandable nugget to how this began.
There is, yeah.
And then there also just happens to be, unfortunately, murder as part of this story. And that itself also seems like a unique combination of moments. And so there is this desire to stitch them together. There's the court case trying to stitch them together. But honestly, I just think that there's a lot of family stress happening, a lot of unanswered questions and scares, and it just put, I think, the whole family on edge, which obviously doesn't help.
Yeah, it could literally be that simple.
Yeah.
That it's just it's a stressful situation for a young boy, and it just escalated with the fiasco of the press and the Warrens and all that. Yeah, I could see it.
It's a bummer, man. Because of course, if you want to separate yourself from reality, it is a fascinating story, right? It reads well as if you were to take it as fiction or as a movie, as a book, whatever.
Right.
But like underneath it all, again, I can't keep saying it enough. Like we've covered so many cases, you start to see patterns in some. I'm not a behavior expert. I'm not a psychologist or anything like that. But when you cover enough cases like this, you start to see how there are trends in motivations. You start to see, like we always talk about, money, the idea of selling a book or getting notoriety is always at the crux of kind of faking a ghost story or claiming I was the murderer when actually you're not the serial killer, right? That happens a lot. And I think that this is another one of those themes that sometimes, children are young. They are not equipped with all the tools that you hope to gather over the course of your life as an adult. And they react differently. And when the biggest part of your life, the biggest part of your formative self is religion, you'll find answers in there or you'll seek answers in there. And so yeah, it's just an unfortunate story here because clearly the family was absolutely going through something. It's just a matter of what that was. And to me, I don't think that this was a case of 43 demons creeping into the house. Either way, still upsetting and culminated in the loss of life, which is always upsetting.
Yeah, which is interesting that, like, I agree. I think the most plausible answer is just the most straightforward, not like a glorified answer, which is just a stressful situation. Which is interesting because the mode's like, oh, my sibling moved away, and it's like, oh, no big deal. But you know, people are different walks of life, so.
Absolutely. Different bonds, different relationships.
Exactly.
And honestly, as much turmoil as it seemed to maybe, and I'm making an assumption, this is my theory, but you know, if that is the case, as much turmoil as it caused David, you love to see a relationship that's strong like that, you know, especially brother and sister relationships.
Yeah.
You love to see that. And hopefully the family, after all of this, kind of settled down and hopefully things got better, you know, and he grows up and they continue to have this wonderful relationship where they lean on each other and love to see each other. Support and all of that. Other, but yeah, this has been the trial of Arne Cheyenne Johnson. Again, a case so well known for bringing possession to the defense in a court here in the United States for the first time. Again, a headline grabber, but it didn't live very long because the judge was like, nah.
Yeah, I mean, rightfully so. Like, you don't want to be the one that, like, you know what I mean? Like, one, it just makes a fool out of you, and the whole case is just kangaroo court, right? And then on top of that, it's like, well, like, then people are going to be like, whoa, I'm going to look at this case and I'm going to mimic that. And I'm going to do something terrible and say that I was possessed. And there's an actual chance, like, or outcome, you know?
Right. Now, what you're talking about is tomfoolery. You know?
Yes.
And I won't stand for it.
Not stand for it.
Listen, this is just like those alien cases. At the end of the day, you know, we're going to talk about the facts and the fictions. We're going to talk about the theories and anything we can't explain. I love that corner, right? We're going to explain what we can, and whatever's left unknown, it is. Do I want there to be ghosts, ghouls, and goblins? 100%.
Yeah.
But am I going to pretend that there's, like, you know, when a case like this comes through, that it must have to be a certain way? I'm sorry. No.
No, yeah.
You know, because, listen, in my heart of hearts, I'm still thinking, like, if we get Zach Bagans involved and he goes ghost, Danny Phantom style, and brings a demon into this world, and I don't know what the full idea was, but I pitched a while ago, like, Demon Fight Club.
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
like,
I remember that.
You know, demons fighting it out. Like, I'm still, like, here for that, you know? So if there's valid cases to be made for demons, I got a pitch to sell you on. You know, or maybe we make a band, just a bunch of fiddlers, right? Devil went down to Georgia, played with a fiddle, and I've never seen a band with 10 fiddles, but I think we could do it.
I feel like that might be excessive.
But with that, Task Force, thank you all so much for continuing to listen to us. 222 episodes. That's pretty wild.
Meaty.
We will see you next month for our Mystery Madness. Come on over to redwebpod.com. Again, sign up for free. Come hang out with us. Come send your votes in. What mysteries, what topics did you love? Come contribute to the bracket. And if you want to support us directly, you can do that there. You get the podcast for free. You get Fredo's show, Movie Club, where we talk about all sorts of scary movies from classic to crap, breaking them down, reacting. It's a fun time. We also get Christian and Jillian involved and lots of other things. We have bonus videos every month. We're looking at doing more. And honestly, we're noodling on some ideas. So again, redwebpod.com. And with that said, Fredo, I'll see you right back here next Monday for yet another mystery.